What exactly is salt? Now, NaCl, one of the most common salts on the planet, also known as table salt, is formed when sodium hydroxide reacts with hydrochloric acid. But in the modern world, salt in the diet does get quite a bad rep. Salt is quite a common preservative. It is used inside of the processing methods inside of like McDonald's burgers and all that sort of stuff that happens in like the factories and stuff. It's quite a common preservative to increase food's shelf life inside of supermarkets as well. And one of the things that salt is mainly associated with is cardiovascular disease caused by increased blood pressure. Now, there are reasons that NaCl does cause things like high blood pressure and therefore cardiovascular disease, but there is definitely some things that do need to be discussed surrounding salt and ways to not necessarily just fear it and put it on your sort of big bad diet naughty list, or whatever you want to call it, because there are certain characteristics about salt that make it a very necessary thing. When salt is inside of a solution, it will dissolve, especially in water, and it will form two separate ions, Na plus and Cl minus. These are both known as electrolytes, and you would have heard in school and stuff that the nerve impulses that go through your body, they are almost electrical in a way, and that is because these different positive and negative ions, they carry charges around the body, and that is how the nerve impulses are actually able to properly function. Now, there are two different ions inside of NaCl, Na plus and Cl minus. Cl minus is the less talked about ion of the two, but it can potentially have some benefits. As I say, it does help to regulate nerve impulses, just as a lot of other positive and negative ions do, but it also helps to generate stomach acid, which is dilute hydrochloric acid, which is made from chloride ions. The recommended daily allowance for chloride is something around like 2.4 grams per day, so that's essentially like 2.4 grams of salt, because chloride, as well as sodium, which I'll get onto in a little bit, isn't the most common mineral found inside of like things like fruits and vegetables. It's only really commonly found in seafood products, fish, because obviously the salty water and stuff, it will seep into them and stuff like that. It's found in some meats, but the main way that people consume salt from the diet is simply through adding table salt to food, or through processed foods and foods that have been preserved to have a higher shelf life. Now, while there aren't too many studies on any effects of chloride toxification or chloride deficiency, and how certain like quantities of chloride being inside of the body can affect our health, there are definitely direct correlations between the amount of sodium ions that are inside of the body and certain diseases, certain benefits, certain deficiencies and stuff like that. High blood pressure is the main thing that sodium ions cause, and high blood pressure will cause arteries where it is experiencing a lot of high blood pressure to just wear away. That will then cause cardiovascular disease. Your arteries and stuff are just getting tired, because all that stuff does contain muscles to be able to pump it around the body, and it just doesn't end up being a great thing for your body. And that is because Na plus sodium, it is something that causes water retention. It attracts water and it keeps water inside of the bloodstream. Not too sure on any chemical reasons, but I'm pretty sure it's something to do with the charges / partial charges of both Na plus and water. This means that if there is just a higher quantity of water as well as just the other stuff inside of the bloodstream, it's going to mean that more stuff has to be passed through the arteries constantly, and that's going to like cause it to have to keep it all inside, and it's going to cause the high blood pressure because there isn't enough volume. There's more pressure inside of the similar amount of space. But sodium and chloride, as I've said, they're not commonly found inside of nature. It's mostly found inside of seawater, and it's mostly found and it's being extracted from seawater, and it is found in table salt. They're the two biggest places where sodium and chloride are found. Sodium is a major mineral, meaning it is so necessary for your body to have a good supply of. If you didn't consume sodium and were going for like a no sodium diet, then you would suffer quite a lot, because you need sodium, and as well as those other ions like potassium and magnesium, to also be able to regulate the nerve impulses and send electrical signals around the body. If you don't have a good enough quantity of sodium, you're going to have things like muscle spasms. You're going to be incredibly lethargic and tired, because your body just is not able to transfer signals to actually help you coordinate yourself and move. But because it's not found inside of like things like, you're not going to find many sodium ions inside of an apple or a banana, and you have to get something like a 1,500 milligrams, which is like 1.5 grams of sodium per day. And I think the upper limit is something around like 3,400 milligrams or something like that. That is like the recommended daily allowance for salt. But I think on a necessary daily basis, you 100% need 1,500 milligrams of sodium. So yeah, as I said, salt is almost a necessary thing despite its incredibly bad reputation. You know, the food packaging labels and stuff, especially in the UK, you've got like the four things. You've got fats, you've got saturated fats, you've got sugars, and then you've got salt. Salt is contained on these things, and that essentially means that it's something that you as a consumer is supposed to watch out for, which is no bad thing because, as I've said, it definitely does cause certain things like cardiovascular disease. There's no denying that, but I'm going to get onto a few other reasons why there's this it's a bit of a misconception around what sodium, just how good / how bad it could potentially is in a weird sort of way. But yeah, these are like the four things that are potentially bad and things that you are supposed to watch out for. So when you grab a bottle of like Diet Coke or whatever and you see all green things, that's like a great sign to your brain that green is good. That means it's going to be healthy for me and stuff like that. Even though something as healthy as nuts potentially is going to have like red fats, red saturated fats, it'll have like green sugars, then depending on if they're salted or not, it might be just green or orange like labeling or whatever. But despite its bad rep, it's such a necessary thing for your body to consume. You need salt, and if you can't get it from many foods in nature, then you're going to have to basically get it from table salt. I don't recommend eating things like processed foods because of the other stuff that contains, but salt has been around for hundreds and hundreds of years because it's so easily extracted from things like seawater, and probably the only reason that people used to survive if they weren't in the sea would be off the natural salt that's found inside of meats, just through like the food chain and all the chemical processes and stuff like that. But as I said before, the RDA allowance is something around 3,500 milligrams a day, and the necessary amount that you need on a daily basis minimum is 1,500 milligrams. Now the RDA specifically should definitely vary, as well as the baseline minimum should also probably vary. Na+, an electrolyte, is excreted in your sweat. This means that if you exercise a lot, if you're not a sedentary person, if you go on runs, if you go to the gym, if you do a lot of sport, you're going to need more sodium than the average person that doesn't do the stuff that you do, if you kind of understand what I'm saying by that. If you go to the gym and then you do some kind of sport training on a day, that's going to be like a lot of sodium excreted that you're going to need to sort of recuperate. So it's not such a bad thing to get a bit more sodium in, put a bit more salt on your foods if you are quite an active person, because you are actually going to need it. Now, it's quite hard to understand how much is enough, how much is too much, how much is too little, and stuff like that. But if you are an active person, you are so much less likely to suffer from the cardiovascular disease and the high blood pressure. One, because you're an active person, and that alone does lots of good things, but because that excretes sodium out of your sweat. But the majority of people, they aren't going to intentionally increase their salt intake because they sweated a lot. So they're so much less likely to suffer from cardiovascular disease for that reason as well. But because of the fact that it's being excreted, you are definitely going to need a little bit more to sort of recuperate your sodium sort of facilities inside of your body to be able to transfer the nerve impulses and stuff like that. Because otherwise you're going to get really, really tired after you go to the gym, because all your sodium sort of facilities have just been excreted. Sometimes if I've not had like much food before I go to the gym, I'll just like have some nuts that maybe have been salted or stuff like that. I'll just like grab a handful of them and just eat them all, and that often, and like the sodium that I would have had in those salted nuts would literally have been excreted in the sweat that would have gone out of my body in the workout. So I know that it hasn't actually had a bad impact on my body. It hasn't increased my blood pressure. It hasn't it hasn't made me any more likely to obtain cardiovascular disease. So if you are an active person, you definitely do need more salt than someone who is sedentary. But obviously, I do recommend being an active person because of the benefits that alone just has on the body. But obviously, don't go overboard. Don't eat loads and loads of like salty processed junk because you think that it's gonna be all right because the salt isn't like gonna kill you or anything, because there are other things in that stuff that's not going to do you any good for just your mental health, as well as like your general just physical and mental well-being in a way. But yeah, it's a weird balance to find how much is too much. Maybe just weighing salt, I don't know. Sometimes you can get those little packets. Maybe if you go to like restaurants and stuff, or you go to like town centres, sometimes they just have the packets of just salt and pepper just lying around. And if you sort of eyeball how much is in those, and then eyeball how much you're putting on your food, you can kind of just get a general idea of how much salt you're putting on your foods. I don't know, maybe that's not a good idea. Maybe it's something that could work for you potentially. But that's about all I wanted to say. With that, I recommend subscribing because I like this community of young tribal people who are willing to improve themselves so much more than they already have. And good luck.